Hey everybody, welcome to Unscripted, where we're all about inspiring better conversations and helping people think more deeply and critically about faith, life, and leadership. My name is Sam, and I'm here with someone I'm really excited to be here with. I believe you have a Ph.D., right?
I do.
You are the first Ph.D. on the podcast. I'm pretty excited about that. Pat Willoughby, who's chemistry professor at Ripon College.
That's right. Yeah.
And also, I need to tell you this. I'm so glad you're here, by the way. Every single student I've ever talked to at Ripon College that I've mentioned your name to has had nothing but glowing reviews. They
so
light up and are so excited. So I just want to tell you that. I literally had that happen 2 weeks ago. I talked to some students that came to church, and I'm like, hey, do you know Pat Willoughby? Or I should say Dr. Willoughby. Is that what I should say?
You say whatever you want. Yeah.
All right.
I'm Pat.
Do you know
Pat's
Pat?
Good. Right, yeah.
And they're like, oh, yeah, it's awesome. He's a great lecturer, all these different things. So it was really fun.
Oh, so kind. Well, I submitted grades like 1 week ago, so maybe that was like...
Maybe if I would have changed when it was, they would have had a different answer.
All good. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, thanks for being on here. We have an interesting thing to talk about today. So you and I went on a run like a year ago almost. I don't even know when it was. It was a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's like 9 months. And when we were running, we started talking about this topic that's kind of a buzzy topic in the world right now, but it's something that you knew a decent amount about and ever since then have begun to know even more about. And the topic is dopamine.
Right.
Which is this interesting thing, right?
Right, yeah.
Can you start first by telling me why you got interested in it? And yeah, we'll start with that.
Yeah, so I am an organic chemist by training, which means I love molecules. It's really fun for me to learn about molecules. And so if I can listen to a podcast or read a book about a random molecule I haven't really thought about in a while, I get really excited about it. And so I started reading about dopamine because there's been a lot of really great research that has come on the scene. And I was taken back by how much of our lives are both positively and negatively impacted by dopamine. So I just kept reading and diving in, and then I couldn't help but talk about it to everybody I saw, including you when we were on a run. And so, it's been really fun to kind of learn about it. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Let's start with that though. Let's start with dopamine itself. Tell me what dopamine is, because even that, like, I think there's an idea of what it is. Like I've heard from so many people, like you get a dopamine hit from something,
right?
Like a like button or something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't even know if saying it that way is the right way to say
that's
it.
Good.
So I'm curious.
Good. Yeah. So dopamine's a molecule. It's a neurotransmitter, which means it's kind of implicated in a lot of the things that happen in our brains and elsewhere. It's like multifunctional. It helps with pleasure, which we'll talk about, but it's not the pleasure molecule. It helps with motivation, reward. It also helps with movement. And so there's Parkinson's disease is a dopamine disorder. And so you start to see in the later stages of Parkinson's disease, some movement issues really start to creep in. But it's one of many neurotransmitters. Other neurotransmitters are like oxytocin, which is, I think of it as the pregnancy neurotransmitter because
why is that?
It controls contractions of the uterus, and so it helps babies get born. And then when the baby is born, a mother's brain is flooded with oxytocin to help build that kind of bridge or that connection with their baby. And so it's overwhelming how much oxytocin is like unloaded. And then in everyone, it helps with kind of building relationships and trust. Another one that people have probably heard of is endorphins. So endorphins are kind of our endogenous or native opioids. And so they help suppress pain and they provide pleasure in a pain suppression route.
So like when they talk about running high, is an endorphin being released when you're on a runner's high?
It's a lot of things. It's a lot of things, but endorphins are definitely in there. Yeah.
Okay.
So pleasure is multifaceted and has all of these kind of neurotransmitters involved. And the last one that I just want to mention is serotonin. So serotonin is really important with satiation, satisfaction. It's sometimes called the happiness.
What do you mean by satiation?
Like you're satisfied with the situation. It's a lot of the serotonin in our body is actually in our gut and our GI tract, and it kind of interacts with our nervous system that way. And so if we eat some food and we're kind of satiated or satisfied by that food, that's a lot of serotonin signalings or serotonergic, I think I'm saying that right, systems involved there. And so serotonin is kind of called the happiness molecule because it's more involved with contentment and kind of satisfaction. Like you're like, okay, that's enough. I'm really appreciating this, that sort of thing. And so a lot of antidepressants actually prevent the breakdown of serotonin.
So they make it so that the serotonin stays in your system longer.
Yeah. So you build up some serotonin. It's not, and all of these things are just somewhat oversimplified. Like you can easily have too much serotonin and get sick that way. But yeah, that's one approach to dealing with depression, is to kind of decrease the breakdown of serotonin and think about ways to make sure you're not breaking it down too quickly. And dopamine can be involved with that. Yeah.
So you've got like all these molecules, right?
Yeah,
They're all moving around at once, and they all contribute to how we feel.
Yes.
Like they're actually emotions more than anything else. Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, it helps us process reality and convert that into like a state of emotion. I mean, any psychologist or scientist, no matter what their religious background, would agree that we're all greater than the sum of our parts. So any like thing that I say that I attribute like happiness to serotonin, it's much more complicated than that. Even pleasure is not just a dumping of all of these chemicals at once. It's really kind of complicated, and it's hard to learn it all and get all the details exactly right.
This is awesome. So, I mean, we're going to get more into dopamine, but this specific thing that you just mentioned is something I'm curious about. And it's kind of where faith and religious practice and science, they butt up against each other in this particular spot because, and I think when we were talking, this is something we've talked about a number of times, we are more than just chemicals creating a reaction.
Yeah, definitely.
But at the same time, like you can learn so much about how you're feeling and what you're thinking based on those chemicals.
And as I'm sure we'll get to, something that happens is some of these systems can become hijacked with certain behaviors, technologies, and that really can cause problems in our life. And all of a sudden, these things that aren't supposed to be that important to us become overly important, and we start to be compulsively behaving in ways that really aren't in our best interest.
Okay, let's talk about that. And how dopamine happens, or how dopamine affects that action.
Yeah. So okay, I just mentioned a bunch of neurotransmitters. All of them really are involved in kind of the here and now. They help us process what is going on right now and appreciate, the current and present moment. But
like this, by the way, this mug full of delicious liquid is from Ripon College. You can't see it if you're listening to this.
For all the listeners out there, Sam is always kind of drinking a Wabash mug, and so I wanted to, make sure that he had another mug to choose from.
I love it. And Ripon College is great.
Right. And so they all of these neurotransmitters are involved with the here and now, but dopamine is very unique, and it's unique in that it allows us to be more forward-looking and process how we should kind of allocate the current or respond to the current situation, allocate our current resources towards getting ready for the future. And so dopamine is used a lot with motivation and ambition, and so it's forward-looking, which is very unique to it compared to the other neurotransmitters.
Okay. So how does that look? Like what happens when you're engaged in that practice?
Sure. So dopamine is the molecule that tells your brain, hey, get out of bed in the morning, go to work. I mean, for you, we just talked about running. Like if you think about running, it's a weird practice, right? You go out and you push yourself to physical exhaustion. You kind of run around in a circle that could be as big or small as you want it to be. But it's like, why do we run? And so that ambition comes from several kind of experiences that have led to a dopamine kind of powered ambition pathway in our brain, or kind of a way that we kind of look at life and we say, hey, our life would be better if we endured this run for a little bit. Like we understand that, okay, the first half mile or something might be really hard, but then we're really going to hit a moment of euphoria, maybe 3/4 the way through the run, and then we finish the run and we're really feeling good about ourselves, and we know that it's going to pay dividends for us down the road health-wise.
Okay, you said something that's really interesting. So you said dopamine, without any history, without any memory, dopamine doesn't do anything for running. But once you've done the run and experienced something, dopamine begins to act in the future towards that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So dopamine had this reputation as being the pleasure molecule because they saw that when rats consumed some substances like cocaine or something, get these massive dopamine hits. And what we've learned since then, as we've refined the studies, is that dopamine is actually the reward pathway, or the reward molecule. And it's really implicated in teaching your brain where rewards are, and it helps with reward prediction. And so if you do something that hits the reward pathway in a unique way, the reward pathway unloads dopamine. And then dopamine reorganizes your brain so that you really learn and cement the memory of how you achieve that reward. And so the way that dopamine is released is really dependent upon the reward that happened. And so you start to think of things as these unusual or unexpected rewards, they actually create a lot of dopamine, like an unexpected amount of dopamine. For example, if you reach into your wallet to pay for like $36 of Roadhouse pizza and you're like, okay, I've got 220s in my wallet. You reach in, you pull out and I've got three $20 bills in my wallet. Okay, so this is called like an unexpected reward. In the good direction. You unload dopamine like much more than you would if you just saw an extra $20 bill on its own. Okay. And your brain kind of learns something from that. But then if the next time you're like, okay, I've got two 20s, but you've actually got one, you pull it out and you're like, oh no, I'm missing some money. Your dopamine kind of works in a negative direction and it starts to offset itself. But you really can, from these experiences, you start to cement memories using dopamine. So dopamine's really kind of a teacher molecule.
So does that have to do with habit formation?
Yes, absolutely.
So like if you're like creating habits that are good, figuring out how to reward yourself and get rewards trains your body to want that more.
Yes, certainly. So, if you do something like you go to work and you know that the more you go to work, the more money you're going to make, the dopamine's going to train that system, so to get out of bed in the morning and that sort of thing. Yeah. And that's really different from the here and now neurotransmitters, which are really focused on embracing the present and that sort of thing. Dopamine is kind of more forward-looking, thinking about, okay, what should we do? And unfortunately, that can get hijacked in ways, and then your brain starts to rewire itself so that you do these things that really aren't that good for you in a compulsive, kind of compulsive behavior where you're just doing them without thinking and you don't mean to. Yeah.
So this is where, like, if you do any research online, they'll point to dopamine and people's abuse of that thing inside of us as a reason why things like scrolling social media or wanting to post something so that you get likes or the online space is a really big part of this, right?
Yes, because as I said, with the $20 bill scenario, what we did was we miscalculated a reward. We thought when we opened our wallet we'd get two $20 bills, but we got three, and we got a dopamine hit in a positive direction as a result of that. That's called reward prediction error. It's this weird thing where it feels good to be wrong, but it's because we're wrong in a fun way.
Yeah.
Now, when you're scrolling social media and you see something that's like really appealing, all of a sudden you didn't expect it. Like you open your phone and you like go into Twitter and you scroll down. You don't know what you're going to get, and you get that good thing, that exciting thing, and all of a sudden you're getting more dopamine than you would if you had expected it to come. And that's going to be associated with a little bit of a state of pleasure. And we're going to teach ourselves to go to our phone and look at social media and continue to scroll. And similarly, if we get a like on something that we posted, oh my goodness, like that's just a massive flood, even though the thumb is just blue or something like that, right?
Exactly,
there's more red hearts on your Twitter post or something like that. I mean, you think about what it is, it's just very simple. Like somebody could be like, oh yeah, that's okay. I mean, your brain interprets it like, whoa, yes, tribalism, I love it. Okay.
So okay, let's think about that for a second. I think a lot of people today would be frustrated with the fact that maybe they spend too much time on their phone. Yeah. Or maybe they have these different things that at one point gave them pleasure, but then after a little while of time, they find themselves feeling like it's not doing anything good for them, but they can't stop.
Right.
What's going on there?
So you get the dopamine hit, the dopamine rush from reward prediction error. As soon as you actually get good at predicting the reward, the dopamine doesn't come with it. It's all about the error in your prediction of, okay, you scroll through social media that first time, you're like, whoa, this is amazing. People that like have this interest that I do exist in the world, and they're talking. That's so much fun. Yeah. So you're kind of scrolling through and you see something like really surprising. Somebody likes your post. Whoa. And then the next time, if the likes are the same number of likes, or maybe they're not even present, that dopamine hit is absent. And in fact, it might actually skew towards a negative direction where you're starting to kind of, your dopamine is telling your brain, hey, you need to do more of this so that you can get that rush.
Okay, so that's where I was going wrong. So I was getting this messed up. In my mind, when you have that negative error, you would make you want to not do it. Mm-hmm. But in fact, it makes you want to do it more.
Yeah, so you start to hit this moment of desire or wanting or craving, and you start to like say, okay, I just need to do more of this. And then that reward will come, and you just keep going and keep scrolling and keep scrolling and keep scrolling. And keep looking at Facebook, keep posting things, and all of a sudden hours have gone by, right?
Wild. So it's not that it keeps rewarding you. To keep rewarding you, you'd actually end up with that serotonin. You'd end up with that that satisfaction.
Yeah.
But if you don't get that, it pushes you to keep on doing and doing and doing, and searching and searching and searching. It's really interesting. So there's a lot of like negative stuff happening that happens with this. And are people abusing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's, dopamine itself isn't bad. I kind of think of it as the approach to making money off of these platforms is to get us to stay engaged for longer periods of time. And so maybe I'm looking at it as the victim here, but I feel like we're getting abused a little bit by this technology, because the more we kind of interact with these bite-sized pieces of information, we're losing our ability to focus on things for a longer period of time. It's probably not healthy for us to spend a lot of time on our phone, but on social media. But just these tricks, the like button, the heart button on Twitter, it's keeping us engaged for longer than we want, and it's starting to become a little bit of a compulsive behavior or an addictive behavior.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've just, without even thinking, pulled my phone out and started scrolling, and I'm like a minute in and I realize, oh wait, how did this happen? How did I get here? And it's this trained thing where I'm looking for that surprise.
Yeah, and so there's the habit formation and leading to compulsive behaviors, but there's another dimension of it where we're starting to discover that dopamine is implicated in our pain systems as well. So not only is it not the pleasure molecule, but it's involved in pleasure, but it's also involved in pain. And so you can think about that as it's teaching our brains what to avoid in the future, or it's starting to create dread in our brains. And so not only do we have feelings of desire starting to mount, but feelings of dread or worry starting to be associated with these dopamine-rich behaviors. And what an author by the name of Anna Lemke wrote a phenomenal book. It's really heavy. It's called Dopamine Nation. And she puts forth this idea as kind of a balance between sort of a pain and a pleasure side of dopamine. And so the body always wants to have homeostasis. It always wants to be balanced. And so what we do is if we kind of participate in activities that could lead to pleasure through dopamine pathways. Yeah. Okay, we start to push on that pleasure side of the balance, maybe a teeter-totter. Yeah. What's going to happen is the body is going to find a way to neutralize that or get back to balance by pushing on the pain side of the balance.
So what does that look like? Like, what would someone do if they maybe pushed a bit too much on the pleasure side? What happens next?
What would happen is you get kind of pain or dread or worry or anxiety without a typical stimulus, like without getting hurt. Yeah. So, that's really an extreme example. But if we look at a really small example, okay, let's say you walk up to a dish of candy or chocolates or something. All right. And you're like, well, I'm not hungry. And I'm just kind of like sitting here, like I'm otherwise very good. Like I don't need anything. And you just reach and you're like, I don't know, there's candy right here. I'm just going to take one. Right. So you eat one and your brain is like, whoa, dope. I didn't expect that. Okay. Reward prediction error. Yeah. And you're up. And then your brain comes down to balance, but it doesn't balance. It actually goes negative. And what that negative is that's your brain saying, hey, come on, let's do some more. Okay, simple carbohydrates, sugar, what are we talking about?
Not a big deal.
Yeah, it's just not a big deal. Yeah, so that negative state is your desire kicking in and being like, okay, I need more. And so you go for another one, and the dopamine high is not as high, but it goes back down again. And then you go for another one, and then another one. All of a sudden, the bowl is gone of candy. The chips are gone. Yeah. The bag of chips are gone. It wasn't just one chip. I remember Mike saying, he's like, okay, I don't just go for one chip. I go for one bag or something.
You go for a bag, exactly. Yeah,
Anyway, yeah, I mean, that's what it is. And so that's a really simple and kind of a small thing where these negative states, I mean, desire, wanting, the more you think about it, it's not a real great place to be. I mean, it can be helpful if it makes you ambitious to work hard for something. Yes. But it can also in some cases, it's not helpful to desire something. You start to lose the ability to experience the here and now and be present and be content and be satisfied with our current moments. And if we're kind of participating in something that really takes advantage of dopaminergic pathways with like buttons and social media.
Or M&Ms.
Yeah, M&Ms. I mean, let's just keep scrolling. Let's keep eating. Let's keep doing this. And you start to get these kind of compulsive behaviors because you have this state of desire.
Okay. So this has been super fascinating, and this is where I want to bring it to, like, when we talk about faith, life, and leadership. I think this is life. We've experienced so much of this life, but then there's this faith element that you get right up next to, where you can experience, because of these, we were talking about a little bit before, these different neurotransmitters, these different hormones, right? Is that the right?
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
These different hormones in our brains telling us, giving us different experiences and feelings and these other things. There's this common thing that I'll talk with people about with faith. They'll go to a service and they'll worship with music, and they'll get this experience, and it's powerful and it's transformative. And this is where we were talking about before. It's more than chemicals, but at the same time, it also is chemicals.
They're involved, yeah.
And that's such an interesting point, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I guess what I want to get into is, how do you think about these things, like dopamine or serotonin or whatever the hormone is, along with your faith? Yeah.
So, the thing, I was talking about some behaviors like eating food and consuming social media. Dopamine, I still don't think is bad. I think it's very helpful. Yeah. Some people read the same books, and there's this craze in Silicon Valley where they're trying to do these dopamine fasts. And dopamine fasts are very interesting. I kind of like the idea of putting down the smartphone and like tucking into a drawer and connecting with other people. But the more you look into dopamine, you get a dopamine hit by just making eye contact with somebody, by having a casual conversation with somebody. These are chemicals that make us ambitious to interact with other people and connect with other people. Yeah. And so, if I'm in the worship center and I'm listening to music next to my wife and next to friends, and I'm just kind of engaging in that moment and, experiencing a different type of pleasure, I'm also connecting with people, and I'm not putting myself in isolation, which is what some of these activities can be, and which is why they're really not that good for us.
So here's what I think is fascinating about this is to abuse, for companies or whatever situations, foods, whatever, to abuse the dopamine complex in our bodies. We become less human. We become more reactive. We just do these compulsive things. Yeah. And on the other end, to avoid it at all costs makes us less human as well. Yeah, I mean, it's balance, right? Yeah, and one thing, the more you look at this, it's just one of these things that happens to me all the time in science, where I'm trying to look at something as deep as possible, get all the molecules down, and then you come away with this ultimate lesson that was there all along, and it came from Scripture, and that was, don't put yourself in situations of isolations. Connect to other people. Yeah. Serve other people. The goal, what you see about all of this is our behaviors that search or seek out pleasure. Yeah. That's not good. In fact, I wish we wouldn't say that feels good when we do something pleasurable. I wish we would say that feels pleasurable. It sounds kind of grosser when you say it that way. But why do you mean that? Well, if you eat a bunch of junk food and you're like, wow, that felt really good. Did it feel good, or was it just kind of pleasurable to consume that? That's a good point. What is good about it? Yeah. And whereas if you're kind of singing with people, connecting with people, dancing with people, whatever, just being with the people that you love, I would consider that a different type of good and a moment of feeling good. Feel free to disagree, though. No, I think I get what you're saying, because it's really just we're very casual with our words. Yeah, of course. When we describe something, so when you say something's good, you're assuming that it has a higher level of positivity or goodness to it. Yeah. But then when you say something's pleasurable, when I ate that chip, there was pleasure there. Yeah. But it wasn't necessarily a good thing. And what it makes me think of is there's so many times you read about or hear about following Jesus being hard, it's not always pleasurable, but seeking pleasure isn't the purpose. I see what you're saying. And so, the more of these things that you look at and you're like, well, that didn't feel good. And you're like, what do you mean? It didn't feel pleasurable. Yeah. It felt a little bit painful without hurting yourself. You were a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know if all levels of discomfort are bad. So this actually gets back. We were joking beforehand when we went on that run. Mm-hmm. I grabbed my phone at the end of it and jotted down a note. About what you had said about dopamine and how you understand it versus why faith is still matters to you. And the thing I wrote down was, with faith and following Jesus, you have a decision that whether it feels good or doesn't, you know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really profound because I think in our world, often what's pleasurable is deemed the good, but it's not always the case.
Right. I mean, there's some things you just know in your gut. Like, I don't know what it is. It's, I think in some of my reading, I came across this Jiminy cricket syndrome, where there's things that you do that feel pleasurable, but you've got Jiminy cricket on your shoulder saying, "Oh no.
Yeah. Don't do that.
Don't do that. Come on now." And so, yeah, I mean, that's what I really took away from all of this was I was like, the purpose of it all is not to feel pleasure all the time. Yeah. It's not to just always seek out pleasure, and it's not to find ways of escaping. I mean, how many times? So when I was working in the lab, really long days, I would get home and I would be like, oh my gosh, what a long day. Give me something that if I eat it, it feels good. Give me something that if I watch it, it's compelling enough and I stay interested and it feels good. But it's not, and then you don't always feel that great afterwards.
Yeah.
And so something that Anna Lemke put out, it was really interesting, was we live in the most prosperous country in the world, one of them at least, okay? And we've got the highest rates of suicide, depression, and anxiety. And some of it could be mixing up pleasure and good. And so if you come back to the dopamine balance, the more that you push on the pleasure side of the dopamine balance, where the balance is pleasure and pain, the more you push on it, biologically, dopamine is going to respond with a negative state, okay? It's going to put you in a negative state to respond to that, to lead back to balance. And so there are ways to maybe achieve pleasure out of situations that you wouldn't expect. For example, if you put yourself, I wouldn't recommend this all the time, but okay. people that undergo like cold water submersion, like if you take a cold shower, if you go swimming in a cold pool early in the day, they show that those people are getting flooded with dopamine hours later after the submersion. And so the idea here is somebody else is pressing on the pain side a little bit and getting a little bit of pleasure. Now, you got to be careful. Holy cow, do you have to be careful, because pain, I would rather call that discomfort, because you can start to develop unhealthy relationships with pain. But another thing to think about is just abstaining, because when you abstain from high dopamine state behaviors, you actually bring your baseline down, like where the teeter-totter is at, down to a more manageable state. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, okay, that means less time on the phone, less exposure to kind of high dopamine activities, bring your baseline down. What that also results in is things that are smaller, less exciting in life start to have a greater dopamine hit. Yeah. And so some of the more normal things, some of the more mundane things that aren't as compelling as, fireworks on your iPhone or whatever, start to look much more interesting and start to look much more engaging. Like, for example, if I have I have a really busy season in the spring at work, and then when it all kind of comes to a close very quickly, and then all of a sudden I'm out in the summer at my kid's baseball game, and it's just the baseball games are really cute and fun, and they're really slow paced, and I'm just sitting there in those first few baseball games. I'm just like, wow, this is just great, like relaxing. Like nobody's asking me to do something. I don't have to worry about what confrontation is around the corner. It's just so great. And I think about it, I'm like, I've been really pushing on that stressful side, that confrontation side, that discomfort side, for so long, just because it was a busy season at work. And then totally. I really can appreciate those first couple baseball games, and then it slows down for me in the summer a bit, and then the last few baseball games you start to be like, okay, wow, I've been here for a while. So it could be a lot of the lack of novelty. But anyway, I thought that was really kind of a compelling thought, was the more we kind of use our phone as a distraction and an escape tool for these high dopamine activities, the more we're actually putting ourselves in a situation to not only need them to get for future excitement and thrills, but we're also putting ourselves less able to feel the here and now moments.
Man, there's so much in here. There's one more thing I want to get to.
For sure.
And this is like the practical side of things. So somebody listening might be like, oh man, I found myself addicted to my phone, or I've got these things I know I always do and I feel addicted to them, or I feel like I have this compulsive things that I do just naturally. What are some of the things that you, as you've studied all this, So two levels to this. Question number one, I will start with this. What are some things practically that you've done that you've changed just because this is something you've learned?
Yeah. So the biggest thing I caught in like my travels virtually was we can't let our phones be the default activity when we're kind of looking to pass time. Okay, we really shouldn't pull out the phone. We should have maybe a book ready, a paperback book, heaven forbid, right?
Yeah, a real one.
Just something to read, maybe a Bible, right? That we can pull out, as opposed to, even for five seconds or whatever, as opposed to the phone for like a quick check. I found that to be really helpful. And then just kind of getting outside more, as opposed to, if you're feeling bored, there are a lot of things that you can do that don't involve your phone. Just going outside and looking around, and maybe even just embracing the boredom a little bit, because that's allowing your body to kind of come back down into balance dopamine wise.
Awesome. Second part of this question. What has it shown you about how, like, I believe that you would say God's made us as humans and designed us in particular ways. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah,
okay.
Sure.
So as you think about that, how has that changed the way you view how you were made as a person, like the design of a human?
Yeah. Well, a big dimension of all of this is addiction. So if you look at all of the dopaminergic pathways, these pathways that implicate dopamine, whether it's movement or pleasure or reward, whatever, a dysfunction in any of them can lead to addiction. And so there's this dimension of addiction to all of these things. And I think one thing that Sean spoke to much better than I ever could on the previous episode.
Previous episode you're listening to is all about dealing with this kind of exact thing.
Yes, but addiction really is a flaw biologically in all of us, in our creation. And so as we look at...
And we all have addictions.
We all have addictions, yes. The severe substance abuses that we see in people in our society, those are our brothers and sisters in Christ too. Mm-hmm. And we... these are people. I read somewhere, these are people that are prophets to what could happen to us if we went down the same paths. We're all vulnerable to addictions, mm-hmm. And even the most severe of addictions. So we can be genetically predisposed somewhat, but if you put yourself in a situation of consumption and isolation, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to come out with some of these very severe and debilitating addictions. And so just recognizing that really makes you look at people that are coming down or struggling with addictions much more differently, and hopefully, think about them more as you're kind of thinking about how we should approach these situations. So that was a big takeaway for me.
That's awesome. And so, I mean, this has been something I've been thinking about along with you to a degree, but as I've interacted with people, and one of the things I've taken away from it is the degree to which you said a prophet, mm-hmm. like what we could ourselves experience. It's also shown me just how powerful it is when you are aware of it.
Yes.
And when you decide like, oh, this is actually something I experience. I just may not experience it in a way that is as public or as visual to other people. So because of that, I am more willing to, one, honor them and be grateful for them. And then two, in addition to that, be more willing to try and be humble about that specific thing in my own life and be open to like saying, hey, I've got this addiction. I've got this thing. Right. I'm willing to now work in it. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes you think about words like willpower a lot differently. Because we're just so biologically vulnerable to these things. Especially when you put people in situations of isolation or where they're just really desiring escape from their current situation, and then you make those substances or those behaviors available to them. It's just a recipe for disaster. And so recognizing that from all levels, scientifically, spiritually, I think it's just really going to help us deal with this, because addiction just is one of these really crippling epidemics that we're dealing with multidimensionally. And it, I would say that it's across the board, even with like technology and stuff that's becoming the new wave of it in a lot of ways. Right. And it's scary, but I do think this is really helpful, and just helpful to understand it. Because for me, when you understand it, it helps you think about what your actions are, and you can make choices from a place of knowledge rather than a place of
submitting yourself to whatever is coming your way, a reaction.
Right.
It's more a on-purpose decision.
Yeah, another thing that came up spiritually for me as I was going through this was this idea of service. Like we always kind of talk about, we're here to serve. We're here to kind of carry our cross and that sort of thing. And, as I was reading, I was coming across this idea that discomfort wasn't always bad. Like it's not bad to be uncomfortable. And the other thing that seemed really bad through all of this was not only seeking pleasure, but it was escaping. It was escaping the here and now to get to something, whether it's, on a screen or in a substance or some sort of mental state. And so finding ways to avoid the escape, okay, be present, be here and now, be uncomfortable and serve. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been put in a position to serve God, and I'm like, wow, I am out of my bubble.
Yeah, totally.
This is not where I expected to be. And it turned out great. And it was great. It was a different kind of great than maybe some people are thinking when they think about good. And that's where we want to separate pleasure from good. But yeah, it was one of these really rewarding things. I was, looking back, these things that really impacted my life in a positive way.
That's amazing. I think that is the perfect place to end it. That is really profound and really helpful. Pat, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
This has been so much fun.
Yes,
I appreciate
absolutely.
you being on here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for everybody's listening, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in a couple weeks.